that was a harrowing experience because I was on the narrows of the 199, Tom, which is the highway that runs along the Smith River, and it's the fifth most dangerous highway in America. And then I've got suicidal bears jumping in front of me.
Wow.
Okay, I've got a echo here. That might be me.
The echo's me. Hang on.
Oh, that was me actually. Hey, we're live, guys, with Tom Cowan. I'm gonna hit record and fire this bad boy up. Thanks for joining us today. Give us a thumbs up in the live chat if I sound good. And here we go, rock and roll. Um, hopefully no gremlins.
Echo's gone.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks again, Tom, for joining us today. Really looking forward to this one.
Good to see you guys again.
You're one of our audience favorites, so always a pleasure having you on.
That's good.
Okay, here we go.
One of our primary partners in crime here.
Yeah, no kidding.
And boom, we're back for another episode of Alpha Cast. I'm Mike Winner, and I'm here as always with the great Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme up here on the gorgeous Smith River. Summer's in full effect. The gardens are blooming, and the river time is flowing. Definitely been liking our swims in the river of late. And looking like the heat's coming back a bit this weekend. So, Bear, I assume you guys will be taking your dips as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say it's just fantastic to have this waterway behind our house here. One of the cleanest riverways in the United States, and one of the main reasons why I moved here. And maybe we'll talk a bit about water today, because that's something that our illustrious guest, Tom Cowan, likes to discuss. We're quite blessed to have him on the show today. Bear, before we bring Tom on, any housekeeping or anything to bring the community up to date with Alfa Vedic?
No, all good. I'm just looking forward to having a good chat with Tom here. So let's go for it. We already had a good chat offline about bugs in different parts of the world. I told some centipede stories. Tom was talking about his dislike for horseflies, and so maybe we could do a podcast on that today.
Yeah, we're talking about the bugs that you can actually see and know exist and actually have effects on you. But yeah, today
They're not alleged when they're biting you in the middle of the back, right?
There's nothing alleged about a horsefly.
Well, today we've titled the show Dispelling the Fallacy of Medical Determinism. And this is something that Tom's been fantastic at doing over the years. The concept of self-determination has been largely lost within the field of medical, quote-unquote, science. After all, germ theory suggests that an alleged microorganism, all of 0.005, is that U? What is that, Bear? What is that measurement? It's like a micro something. In stature, can and will... Is that like a nuclear thing? In stature, can and will wreak havoc on the trillions of cells and indigenous microbes composing the human form. And never mind that there may be an inherent intelligence within natural design. Then there's that nasty deck of genetic cards dealt at the moment of conception that holds us forever captive to the sins of our parentage. To top it all off, shit just happens. As our wise medics shake their heads when delivering the bad news that a patient has fallen prey to a quote-unquote disease of idiopathic origin, it's difficult for most to imagine the profound shift in consciousness that occurs within the realization that our well-being is an inside job, and nothing out there has the power to determine our state of health unless we succumb to the fear and irrational options made available through Medicine Incorporated. Tom Cowan, MD, joins us for a lively discussion on the subject of medical determinism, and we can't think of anyone better equipped to guide us through the many fallacies of conventional science. until his recent retirement from active practice. Dr. Cowan had a general medical practice, first in upstate New York, then for 17 years in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and for 17 years in good old San Francisco. He was a founding board member of the Weston A. Price Foundation and currently serves as its vice president. Dr. Cowan continues to actively lecture and interview, sharing information via his website, drtomcowan.com, where he also offers many of the products he has used personally and in his practice. Additionally, Dr. Cowan offers high-quality Beyond organic vegetable powders and kitchen staples on his drcowansgarden.com website. Tom lives with his wife, Linda, on rural farmland in upstate New York. He has 3 children, 1 stepson, and 7 thriving grandchildren. Show links here to follow Tom and get all his wonderful products. Lando, take it away, my friend.
Great. So, Tom, good to see you, my friend. And
too, Bear.
looking forward to this here today. And, maybe as a segue from our biting insect discussion, we're talking about, or I asked you if you had noceums back then, those little invisible things where they're biting you and you can only feel them. It seems like the medical profession and science in general largely deals with noceums. And in my practice, I had a hard time treating noceums and, kind of approached it like a tradesman and just kind of fixed what I could see. And the outcomes seemed to, usually be favorable a lot of times. So, we can get this into all sorts of things. I know you've done a lot of brilliant research on, so we can go into the area of all these deterministic things that we're told are going to have their way with us, everything from genetics to microbes and so forth. But maybe we could just start within the context of what you've been up to with your new biology and then use that as a context. So catch us up, if you would, to what you're doing these days. You've done a lot of great things there, training new doctors and, the things you've developed over the years. And then maybe we can use that as a springboard into medical determinism or scientific determinism, we'll call it.
Yeah, thanks, Bear and Mike. So yes, we started. It was basically Asher, my son, his idea, something like, you've been talking about this for I don't know how many decades. Why don't we see if we can actually help people by making a clinic where people, the doctors treat people along the lines you're talking about. So that's really where it got started. So we formed that, and so now we have this new biology clinic. And you could say, what is the point of this? And the way I describe it is, and we're all familiar with conventional medicine and conventional medical and biology thinking. But I don't think most people are aware of just how, in some ways, specific it is. So, for instance, so let me just say it like this. When you go to a medical doctor and you describe your symptoms, they diagnose you and treat you based on certain theories, right? So the reason you have a sore throat is because a virus, inhabited and tore up your throat, right? So that's the viral theory. And the reason you have heart disease is because you have too much LDL cholesterol and that forms plaque in your arteries. And that's the coronary artery, theory. Now, the everything they do, even the diagnoses, are based on theories. And I would actually say many of them, if not most of them, are actually disproven theories. And the ones that aren't will soon be disproven theories. And that's a weird way to run a medical practice. Like, person comes in, you make a theory of what they have, even though it turns, they say, oh, you have swollen joints. I have a theory that you have rheumatoid arthritis. What's the definition of rheumatoid arthritis? I don't know. Or it's swollen joints plus an antibody. But 40% of the people have swollen joints and exactly the same and no antibody. So what is that? Uh, so they're treating, and then they say the antibodies cause the disease, even though they admit there's not a single study showing antibodies cause anything. So that's actually a disproven theory, but that's how you're treated. And they give you drugs to stop the antibodies. That's how your swollen joints are treated. So we decided, and I decided, I don't want to treat people like that. I want to base it in reality of what happened to them, what's their story, and based on all the different parts of their story, the emotional, psychological, nutritional, whether they get out in the sun or whether their wife beats them or hits them with a hammer, there's always a story, and that there's no like to get away from as much theory as possible. And my experience is that's when you can really start to help people.
But how can you see 60 people a day that way?
Well, you have to have 10 doctors. Right.
Yeah,
That's
good
one of the
answer.
problems. But it's not, this isn't just a financial problem. I mean, it's partly that, and that was partly the reason behind it. This is a philosophical slash thinking conundrum. They think differently. And I tell you, this topic of determinism, I don't know, Bear, if you experience this too, but there's only one thing which you're not allowed to disagree with as a medical student or medical resident. You can disagree on just about anything, but you cannot disagree that the patient has no agency in their health. If you say, well, this is because you do such and such, or you think such and such, or you don't do such and such, or because you never moved your body, or any of that stuff, you're out. Like that is a faux pas that is uh, not allowed in medical education. Except interestingly, if you smoke, then you're a dumbass, and you deserve what you get. Somehow they had their bug up their ass about smoking, which which is interesting. But anything else, it's you got bitten by the virus, you got bitten by the germ. It's like Mike said, your genes or bad luck. Just get over it. And that is the fundamental tenet of conventional medicine. You have no agency.
Even more disturbing, though, is we have a conditioned population that's now generational that loves those diagnostic terms, and they love wearing bandanas and
Yeah,
putting,
yeah.
little ribbons on their, on their car, and it's like victim virtue signaling all over again.
And Bear, I'm sure you've heard this too. The amount of patients, people who would have certain symptoms, my foot hurts and my knees are swollen, and phew, thanks God, I finally went to the doctor and he told me I have lupus, or as I used to call it, whoopus. And I feel so much better. And I think, you don't feel any better. In fact, you're now going to be confined to a life of whoopus because you identify with it. And then next thing you know, you go to support groups and then you contribute to the Whoopus Foundation. And your whole life becomes around having whoopus. And you can't get out of that then. Because if somebody says, oh, can you tell me the definition of lupus? I don't know. Can you tell me how they proved that the ANA antibody A exists, B causes lupus? I don't know. In fact, studies say it doesn't do that. So it's just a house of cards. And as you say, the victim consciousness is at the key. And people don't realize that it's bargaining with the devil. You agree to be a victim, therefore they tell you what to do. They tell you, what to take, how to live. And, it's like, I don't know how many, I'm sure you saw, oh, the cancer patient, he's such a courageous person. And I say, what did he actually do? Well, he went to his chemotherapy sessions and he sat there with his arm out and they gave him chemo and he didn't do anything else different in his life. He didn't think different, didn't check how much in the sun he was or what he ate or anything, nothing. He just did what they told him. And that's the definition of courage in modern America.
But he gave it the
Weird.
good fight. Yeah. I gave a talk at a health center down in Santa Barbara a few years ago. And I was just introducing some of these other concepts of what might actually make us ill. And afterwards, a gentleman came up and kind of reamed me up and down for not having empathy and for blaming people for
Yeah.
their illness. And I said, well, no, actually, it's the opposite of that. But I'm sure you've heard that too.
Right. Exactly. They say, and you hear this, we heard this with COVID. You say there's no evidence there's a virus. How can you possibly say my aunt didn't die of COVID? And I'd say, wait a minute. I'm not saying your aunt didn't die. I'm saying by the way, she had 4 boosters, et cetera. I'm saying the mechanism is not right. And she actually poisoned herself. And it's sad, right? It's unfortunate and all. But I don't see how that helps us to not speak the truth about what happened and to make these stories up that just perpetuate, nobody is allowed to say there wasn't a virus or there's no such thing as COVID, there's no definition because it's disrespectful to the millions who died of it. It's weird.
It is. And of course, the only solution is a consciousness shift.
Yeah.
And, genetics perhaps are the biggest boogeyman of all. I had a client a while back who had a history of ovarian cancer with her sister and her mom. So she promptly went out and got a complete hysterectomy so she couldn't get ovarian cancer. And, I
Like a
preventive
hysterectomy, like just
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So maybe just a little story just to preface jumping into, because I know you've been on this a little bit, and I'd love your perspective on, what are genetics actually? What's going on there? What is DNA?
Yeah. Let me just get something here.
Yeah, because this is at the heart of determinism, of course, and this weird fatalism within scientism. It's like there's just no concept of free will. It's like,
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and
here's, for me,
go ahead.
it was always you'd hear stuff and then, the is it true thing would sort of go off, right? So then we investigate the claim. So what is the claim? The claim is we have this chemical. This was more the original claim. It's been changed a little bit. But you have this chemical, which then was discovered to be in a double helix. So there would be a zipper mechanism so it could divide and make 2 copies of itself. And through the process of making proteins called translation, the DNA coded for the blueprint of life, right? That's what we're told. And it does that through making proteins. So Okay. So the first problem then, so they figured out how many proteins, 200,000 or so, and 20,000 genes. And as I like to say, apparently geneticists are not good at arithmetic because there's 180,000 missing codes for the proteins. So that was the first thing that got my attention. The second thing was they say that DNA code is the same in every tissue, every cell of the body, right? You've heard that.
Right.
Turns out not to be true, but, or at least not in the way they say. But let's say that was the claim. So that means the code for your nose is the same as the code for your arm. Therefore, if you cut your nose, it should be just as likely that you form an arm tissue in your nose as it is a nose tissue. But I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen anybody cut their nose and grow an arm out of their nose because it doesn't happen. Somehow the body knows, well, this is an injured nose, so reconstruct the nose, the form of the nose. If you get an injury or deterioration of your liver, you don't make a new kidney in your liver. You make a new liver. Or if you cut your leg, you reform leg tissue. And if the code is the same, how is that possible? Okay, so that's a problem. And then they had an answer for that, which is there's something epigenetically above the genetics that tells the DNA, turn on the nose proteins. So what's that? We don't know. Well, how do you know it does that? Well, because it forms a nose, not an arm. So how do you know it's genetics? Are you saying that it forms an arm in your nose? That's always the interesting retort. No, I said your nose forms a nose and your liver forms a liver. I'm questioning whether the mechanism is this DNA. And there's no evidence that that's true. There's not even any evidence that really that DNA exists or in the double helix. And, I got that. I ended up reading the original paper from Watson and Crick on proving that DNA is a double helix. And I won't bother to read it, but there's not a measurement in the whole paper. He said, let's assume that there's this rotational angle of like 8 angstroms or something. Then this would be a double helix. Well, right. Because if you assume that you have 4 corners that are 90 degrees, then you have a square, because that's like the definition of a square. So if you assume you have this rotational angle, then that's the definition of a double helix. You didn't find anything. And then the evidence that there was this chemical was they took some pus and they washed it and they put some.
Oh, Bear, are you there?
And they got a picture of
I'm
a
still here.
cross,
Oh, there we go.
right? And that's the picture that proved that this thing exists and was a double helix. Interestingly, later, a group of undergraduates at Sussex University, I think, did the same procedure with the spring from a ballpoint pen. And they got the exact same picture. So I tell people your hereditary material is equally likely to be DNA or the spring from a ballpoint pen. But if it's from a ballpoint pen, it's hard to imagine how we evolved since, as far as I know, ballpoint pens have only been around for 100 years. So we must not have been here 100 years ago because there was no ballpoint pens. The problem here, and I think you guys will appreciate this, is we have a theory in biology and, quote, science and medicine, which is everything in a living system, like us or a frog, is physical, right? And so if you're going to look for where the sound comes from in a radio, You dissect the radio and dissect the wires, and you keep looking for the sound. And if you dissect it down into imaginary atoms, then you will eventually find the origin of the sound. Except that's not true. The sound comes from the radio station. And the radio is just a receiver for the sound. Now, let me give you an example of that. There was this one we talked about in this one chat group and had pictures of. A little girl is born with missing half of 4 fingers of one hand. What happened was her mother had 4 fingers, same 4 fingers, same place of the same hand, chopped off in a lawnmower or some kind of accident at 2 months pregnant. And that's how she was born. And that tells you that it ain't DNA. DNA has nothing to do with heredity. Now, I didn't say you don't look like your father. And believe me, sometimes I act like my father and I can't stand it. But it's not DNA that's doing that. There is heredity. People look and act and say stupid things just like their parents, and frogs look like other frogs. That doesn't prove the mechanism is DNA. And even the mechanism, the proof that it exists in us the way they say it is, that it's a double helix, that it codes for proteins, all that is, as far as I can see, based on unscientific speculation.
So you're saying the Human Genome Project was just all built on false prepositions and really has no basis for truth or fact there?
Well, you know what's interesting about that, and I didn't know this until recently, but I thought that the difference between the Human Genome Project and a quote virus was the Human Genome Project, they took a human and they sequenced the DNA end to end from only that human. And the problem with doing that with a virus is they never had the virus first, so they can't sequence end to end and know it's from the virus because they never had the virus. That's what I thought. It turns out they've never actually sequenced a human DNA. I don't know if you guys know that. They do the exact same thing. They take a bunch of tissue from humans, but it's also got probably other contaminants in it. They grind it up, make little pieces out of it, and then they computer puts that together into a long string. Now, they say then that 20% of the human genome is missing. Now, think about that. They've never actually taken a person and sequenced it end to end. So how do they know that 20% is missing? How do they know it's not 80% or 5% or no percent? If you've never seen the book, how do you know if you take a million words and put them together, you actually have the correct book? You have to have seen the book, right? You can't do that. And they've never seen the book.
Yeah, Tom, this makes me think of that famous quote from Nikola Tesla, where he says, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality.
It has no relation to reality.
It's all modeling.
Yeah, there is not that you would think they would take a banana, only a banana, and then extract the DNA and sequence it end to end, and that would be the blueprint. That would be the fact of the sequence of the banana. And you knew it was a banana because you started with a banana. But they've never done that with any organism. They just take a million bananas or so, chop them up into the DNA that they extract with these chemicals. They chop it up into little pieces have the computer put it together in an alignment process. They get a million different possibilities, and then they choose the one they think is most likely the banana genome. You think, what is wrong with, how do you know? Because if you've never seen a banana genome, if you've never seen the toenail of a invisible unicorn, how do you know it came from a unicorn? Somehow that escapes modern scientists.
What's so phenomenal is how they've been able to pull this off for so long. And
No shit.
honestly, I get a little discouraged when I see a lot of doctor types even that, I think are relatively intelligent and just repeating this without ever thinking about it because the flaws are so transparent that it boggles me that
It
even a
is.
layperson can't figure this stuff out.
And we all did that. I mean, I say these things and I make fun of people, but I thought the same thing, 10 years ago or 7 years ago. And and I say now every mistake I ever made, it's maybe not 100%, but is because I believe the dominant narrative without looking into it. I didn't ask like, yo, how did you find this DNA and prove that it's the blueprint for heredity? Show me the paper. And we just assumed somebody must have done that. And, I know if there's new people listening to me, I hear the same reaction over again. So, okay, this guy makes certain amount of sense, right? Because he's like trying to be logical, meaning me. But I know my next door neighbor is a doctor and a geneticist and a scientist. They can't all be that stupid. Like this is just too transparent, as you say. Like if nobody ever sequenced the whole thing by itself, how would you possibly know how much is missing? Right? If you've never seen an invisible unicorn, how do you know that if somebody draws a picture of it without a nose, that the real unicorn has a nose? You don't know. And that's what all of genetics has never once sequenced or isolated or, in fact, found this chemical intact in any organism. Not a quote virus, not a banana, not a frog, not a person. So it's just computational modeling, which makes no sense.
It seems like in the same way that what they do with the virus, it's in silico, right? Like the genome
Yeah.
is done in a computer. It's modeling in a computer.
Yeah, it's like with SARS-CoV. I mean, when you think about it, so they take somebody's snot and they don't know what's in there. They don't look for what's in there. They take all of the quote RNA, which you can't even prove really exists, but that's another story. Let's say it does. They break it into little pieces, 56 million. They tell the computer, align these in all the possible configurations using certain rules, right? They get 1.2 million different options. Now, it's like, again, so I say, Mike, I want you to make War and Schmies instead of Peace. It's a book. And here's 1,000 words, say 50 million words, and the computer arranges them in a million different options. Mike, tell me which one is the real War and Schmies. How would you do that?
Well, you don't have the proper initial standing to go by. So I don't have a reference point to begin with. So
you just choose one.
yeah.
And that's what they did. They just chose the longest one. So you take the longest book, and that's War and Schmies. And then forevermore, if somebody says, show me War and Schmies, you show them your book. And you think, are you kidding me? This is genetics. this is this is, virology. It's
Well, that's why technical jargon and vernacular is important for them too, because it serves as sort of a wall to keep the
yeah,
common man out of their specialized quadrants of, of understanding. And then on top of that, science is built on quote unquote consensus, right? So they can somehow get like a singular paper to somehow be approved, and there's a consensus that that's the new
yeah.
standard, the new foundation that they all work off of, and no one ever looks to just even question that, like the crick, like the virus, the 1950s virus paper. I'm thinking out what it's called, you would know. Like we
Enders,
see
yeah.
the enders, like that's with every, seems like with every single foundation of quote unquote what we like to call scientism, because it really just seems like a mythological religion at this point. You can go to those consensus papers, and there's just logical holes throughout them, but no one ever questions them.
Yeah. It's great. And then not only that, and this came up even this week. So then you have this mythical genome of the mythical virus, or it's a mythical genome of a person. That was never extracted from anybody. It was just a guess, but that the computer gave you options and you just chose one. And then it becomes the standard, right? So then it becomes the consensus. And now there's, quote, scientists who are saying, but real science is you have to disprove the consensus opinion. You don't have to falsify claims. You disprove that you have to disprove. And think about this. So I claim there's invisible exploding unicorns that are shitting on your lawn. Now, how would you disprove that? You could say, well, I went to my lawn and I didn't find any unusual unicorn shit there. Well, right, but Mike, that's because your unicorns learned to use the restroom. And so you won't find them on your lawn, and then they learn to bury them, right? So it will keep going on. Well, how do you find this invisible virus? Because it makes people sick. Yeah, but he was around somebody who had this virus and they didn't get sick. How do you, what, that's it. You've just falsified that claim, right? Well, that's because you have a good immune system.
Yep.
So what do you mean by an immune system?
I'm
Antibodies. Antibodies mean you'll never get sick with the virus, right?
Well, what you're
Then you
illustrating
have
here,
HIV
Tom.
antibodies, and that means you're going to die with the virus. Wait a minute. You just told me just.
What you're illustrating here, Tom, is why Karl Popper's falsification whole theory, and how you need true science is falsified, is that's not how it works in the real world, because the Institution of Scientism is always pushing the goalposts down the field.
Yes.
They're always extending the field out.
Well, it's actually the W.C. Fields quote, which is, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. So then they throw the big words in. So it's the epitope of the antibody that causes your NRF2 pathway to not function. And then you think, yeah, I have to straighten out my NRF2 pathway. Otherwise, the epitope of my antibodies won't function. And next thing you know, I'm going to get herpes on my testicles. So I made a commitment to myself, which is I'm doing my best to not use an explanation of anything that I can't personally experience. In other words, if I want to eat a tomato, it's because I like tomatoes, I grow tomatoes, I feel good after I eat tomatoes, not because they have lycopene in them. Because frankly, I don't think they have lycopene in them. And if they do, I don't think it makes any difference.
And now we've got the whole nutraceutical industry jumping on board at the same time.
Right.
And
The
so you
reason to
have
eat tomatoes is
the
lycopine, and
alternative.
that helps your nerve 2 pathways, and then it straightens out the redox reactions in your body. You see, wait a minute, I have redox where? That's where we're at.
It's comical if it wasn't so tragic. You know, another
Yeah.
great example, just you know, from the time I was in school, looking at the whole evolution of cell biology and transport against across cell membranes, and I've just watched this narrative change for decades now, as far as how a certain substrate gets, you know, in and out of cells, and then oops, that doesn't work anymore, so we have another theory to you know, explain that. And it's just one endless theory process, one after the other. So it begs the question then, of course, we have our own ideas about this. Um, how do things work in the first place if it isn't, you know, everything emanating from a material source? And I think, you know, another great topic that you've done great justice to in the past is how the heart actually functions. And anthroposophy, you know, has some good insights, I think. And if we look at the embryological formation of the heart, of course, we see that it's an energetic event, and then certain things come into stasis, and then you have the development of, you know, vessels, and eventually the heart, and it follows the flow of energy. So, you know, there's a great amount we can glean maybe from what's really creating a nose versus an elbow, and so how far off are we to actually merge, you think, some of the technologies that might be useful to investigate with what folks used to know centuries ago? That's kind of a large topic question, I know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's hard to answer that directly, but I would say that what I have come to is that, first of all, this theory that everything that determines us and everything that makes us up is physical is a wildly unproven and almost certainly incorrect hypothesis. You know, I used to ask heart surgeons back when I was training. I remember this one guy, and it was an like adamant believer that everything is physical. So once I asked him, did he love his wife? Yes. With all his heart? Yes. So if you dissect somebody's heart, you're going to find love in there, right? And he got pissed off at me, and I decided not to pursue that. Uh, so we, we are formed by something like a radio outside of us. It's in what? The field. And we are similar. We are receivers and transmitters of the energy of creation. Now, how that works, I have not much idea, but that seems to be the way it is. And it seems that the water is the mediator of that process. So there's this electromagnetic field, and it's essentially, not to use a computer word, downloaded through the water, and out of that, something we call physical is created. And that's what we call living systems. And the difference between one living system and the other is the information that was downloaded. That's what determines who you are and who I am, and the difference between you and a frog and a snake and a daylily and all the rest of it. Now, I admit that I can't prove that, so that's like a belief system, but I think that is the way that humans, the real humans who knew stuff, actually saw the world. It's a alchemical world of, you know, there's fire, and there's the air, and there's the water, and then there's a physical substance, and it's all sort of glued together by the ether. And that's what we're working with to create reality. And my point of before, all those things you can see and experience and work with and get better at working with, but only, it's like the Wizard of Oz sort of, only if you believe it. If you believe in Earth 2 pathways, you're never going to see the water because you're chasing ghosts all the time. By the way, I had something to say about
And
that whole
the
receptor thing was so interesting because they tell us how do things get into cells because they have receptors on the cell membrane. According to Hillman, there's approximately 700 different receptors, including some which they say have been evolutionarily conserved for like millions of years, like receptors for aminoglycosides like genomycin. So in other words, human beings put a protein, a receptor on their cell for millions of years for a chemical which was invented around 1940. Just waiting for, like Pfizer to come up with this so they could get it into the cells. And then when you do even an electron microscope picture of the cell, supposedly 700 different things, whirligigs sticking out, as Hillman said, it's as smooth as a baby's behind. There's no receptors. The whole opiate receptor, serotonin receptor, dopamine receptor, it's bullshit. There's no receptors. And if you disagree, show me how the isolated proved a receptor is there, because I don't see it.
So what do you think's going
a
on
real
there? Oh,
simple.
go ahead, Bear.
I mean,
Go ahead, Matt.
again, it's not that things don't have effects, right? If you give somebody, serotonin chemical, I don't think we don't have synapses in our nerves either. That's an artifact of dehydrating the nerves. So there's no synapses and no neurotransmitters. Hillman, I would say, disproved that. But I didn't say that there aren't chemicals that don't have effects, right? Like you take LSD, it has an effect. That doesn't mean there's receptors. That just means that chemicals probably can alter the configuration of your water, maybe in goofy ways, so that's a scientific term, goofy ways, so that you download weird shit. That's another scientific term.
Yeah, I
So
think I'll just say this. I think there's a massive confusion of within the science, and I wanted to bring up a question here because multiple people asked it in the chat, going back to DNA, and this kind of ties in. We obviously see effects, but then they want to take those effects and attribute cause to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no doubt, right? Like they can take DNA, quote unquote, DNA samples, and typically that's some sort of fluid or blood or something. And they've done this with like court cases, right? Haven't they been able to use some sort of DNA process to check and verify that a specific individual was on the scene of the crime, or like what's happening there? There's some sort of mechanism there of signature resonance or something?
Yeah, I mean, I've had prosecutors who tell me that they know that DNA is bullshit and they use it to intimidate witnesses to make them plea bargain. And I also know that you can send a sample allegedly containing DNA and you can fill out the questionnaire and you could say that you're a Cocker Spaniel and they'll tell you what breed of Cocker Spaniel you are. I mean, I think Cocker Spaniels are a breed, but so it's not as foolproof as we have been led to believe. That's number one. The second thing is I'm not sure the answer to this. Like, what are they looking at? Which is a good question, because the technique they're using is, they say, proprietary. So they taking some tissue or blood and mixing it with certain chemicals, and that's creating an effect. Now, that's a very interesting thing because if you say, how do you know you have insulin in you? Right? Everybody, if you raise your hand if you have insulin, yeah, everybody thinks you have insulin. And people say if you eat too much sugar, your insulin receptors get wonky, which we don't have insulin receptors. But how do you know there's insulin? Right? It's a simple question, which I never asked in medicals. Well, you take somebody's pancreas and you grind it up and you mix it with an acid and then you mix it with base and then you centrifuge it and then you filter it and then you buffer it and then you dry it and then you do a chemical assay. You say, yo, how do you know that that stuff was there before you mixed it with the acid? Because every different chemical, like insulin or testosterone, has its own steps, right? Like you mix this one with acetone, then you get testosterone, and you mix this one with lactic acid or something, and then you get this. So how do you know that that wasn't created by those steps? And I've asked analytical chemists, how do you prove to me that stuff was there in the living person? And they can't. Therefore, it's a belief system. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. And all they can say is, when I mix it with different chemicals, I get a different result. Like, right.
It seems
So,
like one of the big problems here is chemistry and the atomic model of chemistry, which
yeah,
seems like we always get to on this show, Bear.
it's all atomism.
Well, with you know,
We believe,
I spend a lot of time in my chemistry lab making things, and you know, there's certain techniques and technologies, but what you're really demonstrating is that you're changing the quality of substances by your
yes,
procedures. And so, you know, I don't at all bother myself with you know, certain factors that people are standardizing out there in nutritional supplements. I just want to purify and enhance the quality of what's already there. And
right.
it seems like the old school folks really had a handle on that. And all I can say is, after spending a lot of time doing that, it really does create qualitative changes. So, obviously, to me, that's where we need to go. And, you know, when you do go back to those old alchemical principles and you're looking at water, you know, I believe that's the whole ball game here, because that's, if you look at the etheric mechanism or anatomy of the human body, you know, that's kind of the emotional level, and equated with water. It's what the alchemists called uh, the sound ether or the chemical ether, because then that would just convey that resonance that would in turn create form and function. So,
Right.
um, it, you know, it may not give us all the immediate answers for everything, but at least it's a good foundation that there's some other mechanism at play other than little magic BBs sticking together.
Exactly. Now, just to be clear, I didn't say that if you grind up the pancreas and then you come out with this chemical, the chemical doesn't do anything, right? I didn't
Right.
say that. The chemical does do something,
Mhm.
and it interestingly does something that's somewhat similar to what we think a pancreas does, which is interesting. But I think you're exactly right, Bear. What you're doing is changing the quality. You're taking blood and changing the quality to create something different. Now, that may have a beneficial effect, right? It may be life-saving. It may be wonderful. But you've got to be careful, A, in saying that's because you have insulin in you, which is not proven by that, or B, saying the mechanism is the same, or even saying that therefore you would suspect it might be have untoward effects because it's human created, and you've got to make sure that you've created something that's beneficial, which I think you could. And I think that's what alchemy was doing, changing things and sublimating them, energizing them, whatever, putting consciousness in them so that they would work more effectively in enhancing the life of people. That's great. I'm all for manipulating things as long as you don't tell yourself a story that this is because we have this in us and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and I would say there's a great contrast between the spiritual, qualitative, personalized experience of imbuing one's spirit into the practice of that pharmacopoeia, right? Of that alchemy versus
Yes,
this mechanistic, very much physical process of creating insulin like they do now, like you're saying. And
yeah,
then those people that think they have diabetes, or that's their experience, and they're now on this unfortunate path of having to take insulin their whole life. Who's sure that might give them just enough to get by, but who's to say that that isn't slowly destroying them? Versus maybe if they went on this path of them creating their own, going through the alchemistic process, then they could truly heal because they were now going through the personalized process of imbuing their own spirit into the matter.
exactly.
And so, Tom, yeah, like that's a big thing that I've gotten into some trouble here with someone in my town trying who, she's on insulin her whole life, and she's very much, I think that's her identity is that victimhood. But I was telling her, you can heal from that, and she got extremely, extremely upset about that, and actually kind of railroaded me on the community Facebook group and said I'm a bad person for saying that, which is interesting because I'm just trying to help from my perspective. But yeah, like, where do we go with this moving forward? And like, because that's tough, right? How do we get past this victim mentality of people have been shuttled into? I don't know.
Yeah. And just to comment on what something I think both of you are saying, but Bear, when you realize that what you're doing with transforming substance is there is you're working with this electromagnetic energetic field and using that as a as the sort of screwdriver, the tool to change the substance to a more human, more healing way, right? That's sort of what you're doing. Then it's obvious that the intention and the character and the quality of the person doing it matters, right? If you're doing it with the intention to heal, you get a different result, just like when you eat food of somebody who's cooking with the intention to make beautiful, wonderful, flavorful, nutritious food, it's different than I hate cooking and I'm just throw things together. Even if it looks the same, it's different. And that's not something that modern industry can deal with. And so everything has to be systematized and, et cetera. And so they take the human out of it. Now, how do you get people to start seeing different? I mean, mostly it happens through, oh my God, I have diabetes, so called, and I have to take insulin, and I'm doing it, and maybe I'm not dead, but then, my whatever is deteriorating, my eyesight and whatever, and this isn't working. I need to ask more questions. If that doesn't happen for you, and we all have the opportunity in our lives. This isn't working. I need to do something different. What am I going to do? Where am I going to look? I'll see what Mike has to say, or I'll see what Bear has to say. Doesn't mean they're right,
Yeah,
but
it's would you hire a plumber to come out if he said, I'll fix your toilet, but there's a 5% chance it's going to get fixed? That's what we accept in
yeah,
conventional medicine, I believe.
yeah.
It's
Not only
Or
that,
remarkable.
but not only that, Bear, but then you're going to have to pay me monthly for a plunger fee. And I'm going to come and I'm going to plunge your
Exactly.
toilet, and that's part of the contract. And you're going to have to pay me monthly to come do that now. Will you hire me?
and by the way, I don't know why your toilet got plugged. And by the way, I don't even know how toilets work. But I do know if I stick this thing in it, that it will temporarily unblock your toilet. That'll be $100, please. That's what
And
that's
give it a
really
name,
what we're dealing
of
with.
course.
And even to make it worse, not only don't I know how toilets work, and I don't know what caused your toilet I have a theory that it's because the unicorn pooped in your toilet. And no matter how many times you say, yeah, but I didn't see a unicorn come, doesn't matter. It's the unicorn. And by the way, here's unicorn repellent, and you should spray that around your house, and maybe that'll keep the unicorns away, and then your toilet won't get plugged up. But it probably still will, because unicorns know how to evade unicorn repellent.
And with a great marketing campaign, this guy will take over the entire plumbing industry.
Yeah, you can sell that baby to just about anybody because they did it.
Oh my goodness.
And they tell you that the reason they know there's viruses is because the virus repellent worked, i.e., vaccines. And they say, well, how do you know that they had measles? What's the definition of measles? I can't tell you that. Even though CDC says you can't tell the difference between measles, erysipelas, smallpox, chickenpox, fifth disease. It says right on their website, there is no clinical signs or symptoms that distinguish. Therefore, everybody before 1990, when they did tests, which are bogus, they don't know whether they had measles or not. So, I mean, I don't know whether by the way, I don't even know whether your toilet is blocked, but I'm going to unblock it anyways.
Well, they know why. It's the unicorn poop.
Yeah, it's the unicorn poop prove me wrong.
Well, I think you highlighted something important, both you and Bear, which is this idea of this like the whole entire conventional system is unable to compute qualia, the qualitative side of reality. And that is going to like David Palmer's hard problem, right? And this is which is this idea of how if we live in a purely physical machine here of the body that is somehow interpolating or interpreting reality through a mechanism of neurology, which you're saying has not even been substantiated, then how that could maybe make sense for like counting things and sort of quantitative representation. But how do we explain that pasta primavera that it gives me an emotional feeling, or even the qualitative experience between the color of a flower being vibrantly yellow or just sort of soft yellow, right? Like they can't explain how anatomy and pure physical interaction can do that for consciousness. They're stuck.
Well, I wrote about this in some of my books. If you think that everything in a living system, there is only physical matter made of atoms, right? That's what we learned in medical school. Atoms, then some of them bounce together and stick and they form chemicals and molecules, and then those stick together and form cells, and then they stick together and you get a monkey, and then they stick together and you get Aunt Hilda, and then comes Uncle Fred, at the same time. Otherwise, the whole thing wouldn't work because you have to get Hilda and Fred together. Otherwise, that'd be the end of it. So, and then I would say to people, so in other words, these two women, they're made of that. The only difference is one has more sulfur atoms than the other one. So the reason you wanted to marry this one and not that woman was because they have more sulfur and less phosphorus than the other one. Is that right? Now, nobody in their right mind would cop to that. But that's what the theory says. That's the only difference. And the difference between a beet and a carrot is because it's got more sulfurs and more and more iron and etc. And the reality, just like you were saying, Mike, every decision we make is based on quality. The reason I like this woman and not that is somehow the quality of her being, right? Whatever that is. And the quality becomes form, the energy creates the form, and that's part of it, and her character and kindness and all that. Even a table, they're both made of wood, for God's sake, You don't like this table instead of that table because it's got more carbons in it than the other one. It's because it's a nicer table. What does that mean? Its quality is better. It was made by somebody instead of a machine. It feels better, whatever. It's a qualitative assessment. There is no quality in modern science. There is no quality in conventional medicine. None. They got rid of it. And what they have is
and
nothing.
killed people that talked about it. I asked a question earlier as far as how we could possibly merge technology into the qualitative sciences, and it already exists. I have an instrument. It's actually digital, and it's one of Wilhelm Reich's original instruments that he would measure orgone.
Yeah.
Which is theoretical and all that. I get it. But when you make qualitative changes in a laboratory procedure and then you measure, then you do get a more favorable reading. Likewise, there are other instruments, biogeometry is one, Lecker instrument that I talk about all the time, that also are able to measure symmetry. And it seems like when things are following natural design and of a higher qualitative state, then they create symmetry. They create harmonious sounds. And so, I think this stuff really isn't out of our realm of understanding and measurement as well. But again, we know what happens to people like Wilhelm Reich and the folks that try to bring that, out to the forefront. But I think people are really thirsting for it now because, we are looking for answers that people aren't getting, as suffering increases. Just, the time I've been in the business, I've seen things reach epidemic proportions that didn't used to exist. So you can only fail and keep up the narrative so long. And I guess that's what we're trying to do here is create a new narrative for people to start bending their mind around.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, this whole way of thinking qualitative, and even it gets down to the nitty gritty. So the question a little bit is, does form and material uh, ha is it able to interact with energy or frequencies, right? So that's what's essentially denied in conventional science. But if you think about it, if you're going to make a violin, and we know that the best violins are made in a certain form, right? The geometry has to be just so, and it has to be made out of the best wood, like moonwood. And then you get the best quality of sound. And if you don't believe that, and the frequency of the note is the same. If you just did a poor violin, and poor quality material, the note is the same, but the quality is different. And everybody can sense that. Everybody can sense the quality of things, and like Mike said, the color, the variations of the shades of the color. Everybody senses that, and in fact bases their life on that, right? That's how they choose what to do with their life and what to eat, because I like the quality of this orange better than that one or something. And yet all that is supposedly doesn't exist. That's weird. But that's modern so-called science, and then modern biology and modern medicine. It's all just chemicals. And the chemicals somehow create your brain, and the brain creates your thought. Get over it. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, and you wonder why we live in a world of complete confusion and people that are just completely lost and and fall for all these psyops, right? Because they've completely been I mean, like our connection to nature has been hijacked, our connection to self and who we truly are. And yeah, so there's just a complete schism of consciousness there with people trying to believe in this, like really trying to live like this. It's just gonna, I think, gonna lead to disease. I think the biggest contributing factor to disease is this sort of placebo effect of believing that you are all just a mass of chemicals, and it's
Yeah.
just like this determinism, right?
Yeah. Nothing there. That's why I'm really challenging myself and to a certain extent the people around me. What would it be like to live without doing this reductionist, materialistic, mechanistic thing? Like the reason I eat oysters is because of zinc, right? That's what people say. So I don't know that there's zinc. I don't have any personal experience with zinc. Um, Now, that doesn't mean oysters are good or bad for me, right? I eat
And that's
oysters.
definitely why sea otters eat oysters too, and clams. They're factoring in the zinc potential.
Right. I mean, sea otters eat oysters because they live better and have better lives when they eat oysters. That's my guess. I haven't asked any sea otters lately, but they don't, I know Pumpkin, my cat, doesn't analyze whether he wants to eat only the head of a mouse or the heart. He just knows there's something about that that's good, and that's what he's going to do. So it's a lived experience. And my guess is the more you live like that, and I would even use the word believe in that, right? That's how I'm going to live. I'm going to eat oysters and I'm going to assess how do I feel and what happens if I eat them. And then I'm going to base my decisions on that. I think you'll get better and better and better at it, and your life will become more and more magical because you will be the one who's in control of, I'm not eating that oyster because then I get diarrhea and have a stomach ache every single time. Fine, right? You now know more about the world. If you believe in the zinc, then you have to get somebody to analyze the zinc, and it's you're way down the abstraction road.
And the information age has been an absolute detriment as far as just people
Yeah,
thinking they have a soundbite and know how something works. And
right.
it's the main reason why I don't work on people anymore, and I just farm. The stuff out there and on the farm doesn't talk back or try to
Right.
outthink itself. It's just a nice interaction. And one of my early mentors, in my youth, just told me if it doesn't grow corn, we're not interested in it. So it's a proof of the pudding out there.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I watch Pumpkin now because he doesn't believe in
Yeah.
things that he can't experience. I've asked him. He doesn't believe there's things that are going to get him. He's focused on what he can see and hear, and I think his tail is a sensing device, and he assesses the situation, and then he goes around accordingly how he wants to live. Now, it's true we can think a little bit, but at least some of us, not all of us. Um, but that's the
well,
base.
I was gonna say, Tom, yeah, like back to the food thing, like when I give my dogs, like Betsy, she's a little more discerning than Callie, who just is complete in faith in everything I throw up in the air, she'll swallow now because she's got 7 years of foundational evidence that I only give her good stuff. But Betsy's somewhat new, and what does she do every time I bring some new food to her? She smells it.
Yeah.
She smells it now. Is she doing a chemical assay there and knowing what the chemical constituents are? No, it's an intuitive feeling apparatus, sensory
Energy
apparatus.
analysis.
Yeah. It's what?
It's an energy analysis.
Ex-
She's
Exactly. And
she's
there's
assessing the electromagnetic radiation of the food.
and in many times she'll deny that food, or if it's accepting, and then she'll take it in. And I'll tell you what, my dogs are never sick. They seem to be pretty darn healthy. Now we try to feed them good food and not give them the choice. But it is interesting that we talked about this a lot on the show. Like typically, wild animals aren't suffering from neurological disorders or you know and autoimmune disorders.
Right.
But
Unless you spray them.
but unless you domesticate them or interface some sort of technology.
Yeah. Spray them or 5G them or something like that.
I think it's important to see how this thinking or this habitual determinism, these things outside of us that supposedly have their way and authority and so forth, how it pervades through all of our thinking, all of our institutions. And maybe since tomorrow commemorates that day when some gentlemen got together in closed chambers and declared their right for self-determination. I don't know if that would fly these days when folks, just immediately succumb to authority or think it's a great idea to have more surveillance and loss of freedoms, through the passing of the big beautiful bill. So this conundrum, I think, really we find ourselves in starts with the relationship that we have with ourselves that was fostered through medical thinking. So, a lot of people in my past said, well, why do you care about all this law stuff and understanding how these other institutions work when you're supposed to be involved in, just the biological sciences? And I think it's, one big package and we've got to change our consciousness if we're going to be free on any level.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And to me, I just wrote another book on parenting, and a big linchpin in this is school. School is the state institution, even private schools, that are indoctrinating children into a certain worldview. And they're very good at it, and they've honed this for a long time. And they're teaching people how to be schooled. We think they're teaching math or whatever, history. They're not. They're teaching how to be schooled. And the children are doing very well at that. And that was the point. When you go and read the original philosophical founders of the school movement, it was always to make people accept working, being workers and basically wage slaves and all that. So they've refined how to do this, and that is a huge linchpin in this project of emotionally, psychologically, spiritually enslaving the people. And the government is a big part of that, as you guys well know.
I would say all the systems are like every
Yeah,
single system out there is set up to essentially funnel people into not only victimhood and fear, but into a sort of mechanized reality of function. Like they just, you know, it's
yeah,
all a big machine. I was saying in the chat, fear is, I like the acronym false evidence appearing real. And and that's really all it is to me. And so when we can get out of all that false evidence schooling, there shouldn't be any fear. And then
yeah,
you should be able to follow your dreams and all that.
yeah,
Yeah, I will say I think there's a big surgence, like we see it at Music and Sky and Confluence and in our
yeah,
communities. A lot of people are unschooling, homeschooling, pulling their kids out, starting homesteads here in the States and
yeah.
folks in Australia and certain parts of the world. So there is a movement of awakening around that element, which is really good to see.
I think there's a big worldwide movement of awakening around a lot of things. And it is great to see. And I think there will be pushback and there will be tyranny. There always is. Um, and, there will be, it will be hard to discern who's sort of on your side because there's a lot of people who want to kind of keep people on the plantation with half measures. But this is not a thing for half measures. We're interested, what does it mean to be a sovereign, free person who chooses and your own path and then takes the consequences for what you decide? That's what we're
And it
asking.
doesn't seem like there's any more room for procrastination. I think we're in it.
Yeah.
We've, yeah, I mean, we've pushed it as far as we can, as far as what we've done to ourselves, our environment, our consciousness, our
Yeah.
children. So it's up right now. It's game
Yeah.
time,
It's exciting.
and yeah, which makes it the best time to be alive. It
Yeah.
might be a nail biter though. So, Tom, I know we're coming up on time here a little bit. I could talk to you all day, but maybe tell us a little bit about where we can find, your good work, your products. I'm actually enjoying some of your products right now myself. I'm on an auto ship with something that I'm enjoying from your store, so encourage everybody to go check it out. And maybe if you could just tell us some links and everything, or any final thoughts before you go
Yeah.
into all
So
that.
our food thing is Dr. Cowan's Garden, DrCowans garden.com. The sort of medical stuff is drtomcowan.com. And then, the probably the most exciting real initiative is the New Biology Clinic, which, as I said, is a online clinic with doctors and, you know, tapping and biofield tuning and movement, primal movement and food and whatever else we could think of that works with the reality of who people are and what life is. Uh, so we're really trying to create a new way of doing medicine. I mean, you guys are too, and there's a lot of different paths to that. But also, I would say the new way is remarkably similar to the old way, like the real old way, not the sort of modern interlude old way. So we don't need to recreate the wheel. In fact, I strongly believe that people got it. We developed a whole world of downloading energy from the ether to power and live and heal and transform and move. And we don't need to reinvent this or invent it. We just need to wake up and discover that it's like, the Wizard of Oz, you tap our heels, it's all been right there. We just forgot.
Yep.
It's time to remember.
And when you come back full circle into remembering, there's a deeper appreciation
Yeah,
for what
what
you
you've
temporarily
almost
lost.
forgot.
So I think that's where we're at as
Yeah,
well.
I get it.
Well,
Great, guys.
this has been awesome, Tom. Really appreciate the time. Really enjoyed the chat. Our live chat was on fire as well. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Show links are in the show notes, drtomcowan.com, newbiologyclinic.com, and also drcowansgarden.com. And very much like us, even though my last name's not Lando, you keep it in the family. So it's great to
Keep it
see
in the
you.
family. Yep.
Yeah, so your son, who I was fortunate enough to meet at Confluence, has really been, it looks like, taking the charge with your business on the garden side, right? And running that
The
and
whole thing. He
the whole
runs
thing.
everything.
That's awesome.
He doesn't
We
tell me about viruses, and I don't tell him about business.
That's great. That works well. Yeah, we're very much the same way here at Alfa Vedic. So,
Great.
fantastic, man. Well, hey, thanks again. Hey, remember, everybody, get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it back to you tenfold. And we'll see you next time, 10 a.m. Pacific time, every Thursday. I think we have an in-house maybe next week, Bear. We'll talk about it. No guest plan.
Oh, yeah,
no.
let's think of something fun to talk about.
Okay, guys. Love you.
Thanks, Bear.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
Mike.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate you, man.